Welcome to the Ellis Talker Show. If you enjoy our content, please like or subscribe.
Hi, welcome to the Talker Show. I'm DV LeBron. Do you have things to get done around the house? Maybe a pergola for summer? Check out K&H Construction. Chris Helms out of Waxahachie. He'll help you out. Let him know DV LeBron sent you. Today, my very special guest is Miss Whitney Krupala, who is running for Midlothian ISD School Board Place 7. How you doing, young lady?
I'm doing great.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I do appreciate it. I've had you on before and a long time ago. You were running for
That's right.
board and you're a friend, and I've seen personal growth along the way. And what made you want to get in this rough and tumble thing that is Ellis County politics again?
Sure. I've heard it said that local politics is a full contact sport, and I do believe that to be true. I just really have a heart for this community. The last time I ran, our community was a different climate, and I do want to acknowledge my opponent then, Mr. Dillo, who turned out to be an amazing trustee. He did a lot of good things for this district, and so I do appreciate his service. But I think we're at a critical time for public education, and we are at a point where we really need people who, first of all, know what's going on in our public schools, and people who have a vested interest in making sure that our public schools succeed. And that's why I decided to put my name back in the hat.
Yeah, and I tell every candidate that comes on, thank you for wanting to serve your community in an elected capacity. I know that it's hard, and it's a lot that you put your family through, and just investing time, money, it's big. So thank you for wanting to serve your community that way. But there's a lot of people who have moved here since the last time I had you on the show. They may not know who you are. Can you kind of give them a bio on you?
Yeah, so I'm a mom, I'm a nurse, I'm a business owner. I have 4 kiddos that attend Midlothian ISD. In fact, next year I will have a student at each of the school levels. So I'll have a high schooler, I'll have a middle schooler, and I'll have 2 elementary school students. So I really have a vested interest in seeing this district succeed. I currently work as a lung transplant coordinator for UT Southwestern, get to help people through the lung transplant process, which is a really, really fulfilling thing. And I'm also a business owner. I have several different business interests, one of which was a home health agency that I owned and operated and then sold to a new owner right before I ran the last time back in 2022. And so really busy, but certainly would be honored to have the opportunity to serve on our school board.
What would you say? And you've seen this. What would you say is the most pressing issue facing the district? Like the one that you see, man, this is really tough.
Great question. And absolutely, it's our budget. We've got a lot of things that the state says that we have to do, but they don't give us money to do them. You may have heard the term unfunded mandates. We have a lot of unfunded mandates that the state passes down, and they say, hey, you need to do this, but we're not going to give you any money to do it. And so our teachers have been doing more with less for many, many years. Our board has done a really good job for the most part of making sure that we're meeting those critical needs. But there's a huge budget deficit looming for next year. Right now, we're looking at about a $4 million deficit before we give teachers raises. And so I think it's really important. We've got to get it right this time. We cannot use money out of the general fund like we chose to do this last budget cycle, because our financial rating suffers when we do that. And when our financial rating suffers, lots of other things suffer, like our bond rating and those kind of things. And so Midlothian has always been a really good steward of the dollars that were given to us by the taxpayers. But we're at a critical time, and absolutely the budget and figuring out how are we going to balance this and how are we going to take care of our staff as well. It's a really, really big priority of mine.
You mentioned steward of the people's money. How important is that to you? How would you carry that responsibility if you were elected?
Sure. It's very important to me because I am one of those people. I am a taxpayer in this district. So making sure that we are spending the money wisely is of utmost importance. Our taxpayers trust us to do that, right? They trust us to spend those dollars. I think anyone that knows me and that has dealt with me in other capacities like the bond committee, several boards that I've been on will tell you that I am not a person who ever believes in operating in a deficit. I believe in a balanced budget across the board. And so, stewarding those dollars to make sure that we're meeting that target means that we're going to have to make some really difficult decisions, but we have to honor the trust that the taxpayers have put into the board as a whole to make sure that we're doing the very best we can and protecting what makes Midlothian ISD special, but also making sure that we're not overspending.
Yeah, and it's been like 3 years in a row, and 1 year ended up a little bit better because there was a land sale. But 3 years in a row, I think we've been looking at, deficits when they first started doing the budget. And that I've been covering this for years now, and school funding is a beast. I mean, it is just something that, and even Dr. Belding has said, he has a hard time with it. That, people who do this every day have a hard time with it. What would you like to see done with the budget if you were elected that would, you know, try to get away from this getting into deficits? Because I know you don't want to be, you've just said you don't want to operate in those deficits. What would you like to see? Or what would
So
you look at personally?
Sure. So when we talk about our budget, we're talking about 85% of it is going to people. And so really from studying the budget, from being a part of budget workshops, the two that we've had, it really isn't a expense issue, it's a revenue issue. And so what I would like to do is look at ways that we can increase the revenue to the district, like virtual schooling, potentially the sponsorships of the stadium, things that can increase that money in, because at the end of the day, we're likely going to have to make some really hard decisions, whether that's with staff or with programming. And so, as a trustee, I would want to be able to say, I have done everything I can to make sure that we've looked at these revenue opportunities before we start cutting programs or cutting staff. And the district has done a really good job of managing staff as it relates to the needs of the district. We've cut, I want to say 97 positions, excuse me, not cut, but we've scaled back 97 positions through attrition over the last 5 years, and that's saved us about $4.5 million. And so I don't think that this is an issue of bloat or being top heavy or really overspending. I think it's an issue of not enough revenue to cover all of the things that the school district has been tasked to do.
Speaking of revenue, and this is the part that gets, because I got my the evaluation from ECAT, or the appraisal district, and my house was 30% more than it was, and some other people got more, 50% and upwards. You got one of those bills, I imagine,
Yes.
and so when that comes to time to pay the taxes, that's going to be more on the individual taxpayer that contributes into MISD. How will you approach that tax conversation every year? You pay taxes, and I mean, everybody is paying taxes, and you know that's painful. So how will you approach that every year?
So, like I've said already multiple times, I am a taxpayer. And so it is in my vested interest as a taxpayer to not make your taxes go up. Nobody wants higher taxes, right? And I think Midlothian ISD has done a really good job of managing the tax rate over the years. Contrary to what you might hear from some, we have one of the lower tax rates in our area. Again, I think we've got to be creative. This is not the time where, we can really get caught up in, we got to lower the tax rate. We got to lower the tax rate. Sure, we all want that, but we all also still want Midlothian ISD to be what it is today, and to improve what it is today. And so I think we're going to have to get really, really creative. I would never advocate for raising your taxes. I don't want that for me. I don't want that for you. And so we're going to have to take a look at what else can we do to access more funds or to create more revenue.
One of the things that have been mentioned throughout the years is the no new revenue rate. And that's basically the rate where, what you got last year is what you get this year, the way I understand it. And so what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that's something that's practical or can be done at the district?
I'm not sure that it's practical as an entrepreneur and as a business owner. Never did I expect to operate every year and have the same level of operation if my revenue went down. And so, it's nuanced. I think there's probably things that I don't know because I'm not a trustee yet, right? And so there's holes kind of in my knowledge. But what I do know is that if we're not able to operate on what we have now, and we're looking at cutting programs or cutting positions, I don't want to do anything that's going to put us further in that hole, right? And so there's a lot of scenarios that we can play with, but I'm not convinced that the no new revenue rate is practical at this point.
There is a lot of different expenses and inflation and stuff. So it's definitely a nuanced conversation because the state does a lot to the budget and compression, and there's just so many things that are happening. And then one of the things that you mentioned earlier was 80% of that budget is staff. It's, teachers. So I wanted to get into teachers and what your thoughts are on, because right now we're looking at deficit and, looking at paying teachers raises. And there was a thing that came out of, I'm not sure if it was TEA, where some of them got awarded something. And I want to commend Dr. Belding because he's had a pretty good retention rate with teachers, is what I've been told, for the district. So I want to commend him for that. But what are your thoughts on that?
On teachers in general, or the teacher incentive allotment that you're referencing?
We can talk about that one, but just in general, retaining teachers, how will you like to approach it if you're elected on the board?
So we have some really, really great teachers in our district. And I know that because my kids go here. And the type of teachers that we have in this school district are top notch. And I think that's a testament, like you said, to our leadership and to our administration. I think one of the things that we can do for our teachers, and what I've tried to do throughout this campaign, is let them know the reality of the situation, being honest with them about what the future looks like, but also letting them know that we're fighting for them, that they're valuable, and that we're going to do everything we can to make sure that they're taken care of. This is not an issue that's unique to Midlothian ISD. Every school district across Texas is struggling with funding. It's the nature of the beast, per se. But I want to say, if elected as a trustee, it is my top priority to make sure that we are putting teachers at the forefront when we're making some of these decisions. Again, that looks like looking at all potential revenue before we decide to cut. Because when we're talking about cutting, if 85% of your budget is in people, then the most obvious place that you would cut is in people, right? And I absolutely just do not want to have to do that, because really everything else could go away. And if we didn't have our great, if we still had our great teachers, we would still be a really good school district.
Do you think that enough of the money in general gets down to the classroom, to the teachers in general, like from what you've seen? Because I know there's a lot of things that board members see that we don't, but kind of you have life experience, and we've kind of seen, we've been around this educational system a little bit. Do you think that enough of it gets to the classroom, to these teachers?
So again, that's a very nuanced question, because there's things that, I don't see as an outsider right now, not being a sitting trustee, right? I do know that the district is trying really hard to make sure that we're adjusting our funding based on how many kids are at each school. I believe they've started to transition to a pure per pupil system, to make sure that we're focused on the dollars that are getting to those classrooms. Again, we've had a great experience in Midlothian. I feel like my The teachers have always done what was needed to be done to make sure that my kids are successful in school. I think it comes down to, do we trust our leadership? Do we trust the intent of what our leaders are doing? And the people we have in place right now in administration are some of the very best that I've ever encountered working in public schools and as a public school parent. And so I absolutely do trust that what they're doing is to the benefit of the students in our district. And so at this point, I would say every dollar that can get to the classroom, they're doing their best to make sure that that's happening.
Academics, Midlothian, I guess there was another school that just went into the A rating, and there's so many things hitting academics, and the classroom, from behavioral to bully to special education. There's so many things hitting the classroom. What are your thoughts just in general when it comes to academics? What would you like to see? What kind of direction would you like to see the school district go in?
So I think that strong academics is why we're here, right? And we're really want to make sure that we're providing our students a really good foundation for whatever their next path is going to be, whether that's going to be trade, whether it's going to be traditional college. And so I think if we're keeping that in the forefront of our mind when we're planning kind of the academic experience in Midlothian ISD, I think if we're hitting all of those different types of students, students that want to go into the workforce, students that want to go to college, students that want to go to a trade school. I think if we have that kind of well-rounded vision, then we'll be providing a strong academic experience for our families. I can't say it loud enough. Schools are for teaching good academics, right? And so anything that gets in the way of that, I think we should ignore. Not ignore in a way that we don't deal with it, but I think that our focus, we need to keep the main thing per se. Our focus should be on producing, and supporting our teachers so that they can teach very high rigor lessons so that we have a strong academic standard here in our district. And I think for the most part, we're doing a really good job with that, at least in my experience.
When you talk, you kind of touched on it a little bit. When you talk about these outside issues, there are a lot of outside issues that come into, they're just part of what's happening now when it comes to education, whether it was, it was the thing about the bathrooms or Sharia or DEI. There's a lot of these social kind of things are getting into these conversations, even locally. I wanted you to kind of address some of the things, that give you a chance to address some of the things that kind of been lobbed your way about things that you support or don't support. I want to kind of give you a chance to talk to the people directly without the fuzz of everything else.
If you're watching this and you don't hear anything else I say, I want you to hear this. We should be vigilant, but we should not be distracted. Okay. We should be vigilant in watching for these outside influences. I don't think any political ideology should come above our district's job to teach to really high academic standards and prepare our kids for the next step. But I also don't think that we should be distracted by things that aren't happening in Midlothian ISD. Okay. We need to be vigilant that these things are occurring in our world, but not distracted to the point that we're making these things a focus and it's taking away from the really strong academic experience that we can provide for our students.
One of those things that are big with me, there's two subjects, and we've talked about it throughout the years. One of them, is special education, is near and dear to my heart, and CTE. Two very important things. Now, when it comes to special needs and advocating and stuff, those things get really tricky. But you might have families approach you about not getting services and stuff like that. What are your thoughts on special education? And then we'll roll into CTE.
So I especially appreciate this topic because two of my kiddos have actually accessed special education services at Midlothian ISD. And so I understand how hard and frustrating the process can be. And so I think as a trustee, as a person who is focused on good governance, the best thing I can do for families if they're struggling with accessing those services is help guide them in the process. As a mom, like I said, who's had to advocate for my own kids, on multiple occasions. I think you can tell by the inflection in my voice that I'm very passionate about this, and I do think that it is very important that we are identifying these kids and getting them the services that they need to help them be successful. Because after all, like I've said multiple times, our job as a school district is to prepare kids for whatever their next step is. And so if it's, whether it's going into the workforce, going to college, going to a trade school, teaching them skills of daily living, we've got to be taking care of our special populations, and that includes our special ed kiddos. And I'm happy anyone that, even if I'm not elected, anyone that has questions about how to access those services, I'm more than happy to help.
Yeah, and it can get so tricky trying to advocate for your child to get those services, and that's not a thing specific to MISD. It's every district that in the country when you're trying to advocate. Because I've advocated for my kids from here to Arizona to California. I've had to advocate throughout the years, and those are just issues, and goes back to what we were talking about, unfunded mandates earlier, when it comes to special education. Now CTE have the mile, Midlothian has the mile, and that is a very impressive thing. And they also have other things. It's going to come a time where you have to vote or not vote on supporting expansion of CTE, etc. What are your thoughts on that?
So I am a CTE champion through and through. I think that the CTE programming that we have in Midlothian is the crown jewel of our school district. I think we do a really good job of giving kids opportunities to experience things that I never got to experience when I was in high school. Um, and things that I would have, as a nurse now, I would have loved to have had the opportunity to do a health science class or something like that when I was in school. Obviously, there are a number of factors that go into making a decision about whether or not to support additional programming. The budget is one of them, right? We have to have the money to do it. But I'm always going to be a champion for CTE.
Ms. Krupala, if you are elected, where would you like to see the district in 3 years?
Nothing like a good pivot. So
Right.
that's a great question. And, I think we're doing a really good job right now. Like I've said, I really appreciate all of the effort that is put forth by our admin and by our teachers. Obviously there's areas we can improve. We've got to get this budget thing right. We have to figure out how we're going to balance this budget. We cannot continue to dip into the general fund. But we've also got to figure out how are we going to balance the budget, and we're still going to retain good teachers and be competitive, and really attract quality teachers and staff. I think obviously, going back to CTE, I would love to see us continue to expand our CTE programs. There's lots of new opportunities, in the trades that kiddos, I want kiddos to have access to those things. And so over the next 3 years, I'd love to see us balance the budget, get all our wages up to where they're at the top of that competitive kind of group. And then also just continue to expand our CTE programs and continue to offer programs that are going to help kiddos be successful.
Ultimately, that's what it's about, right? Those
That's
kids
right.
being successful. I was talking with somebody at the Department of Labor, and she was telling me about there's such a shortage on wastewater treatment plant operators right now, that they're getting them out of high school. They pay for their tools. They pay for all their instruction. It's some semi-private, semi-government kind of thing where they pay for everything, and they give you a wage while you're in school. And Encore is actually doing kind of the same thing with linemen. And I mean, those jobs are, 100 plus. They can't get people to fill it. So
Right.
there's a really big need in the trade. So I'm glad to hear that, that's kind of where you'd like to support. But this is the part of the show where I give you the mic. I let you talk directly to the people of Midlothian, because ultimately this show is about you presenting to them. So I'm going to go ahead and be quiet and let you do it.
So, I'm a mom, I'm a nurse, I'm a business owner. I'm someone who is invested and a daily consumer of our product. I drop my kids off at Midlothian schools every single day. And so it is really, really important to me that they're successful. As a nurse, I make decisions every day, very difficult decisions, way harder than any decision that I will make as a trustee. And those decisions aren't based on politics. They are based on fact and thoughtfulness and long-term outcomes. And so, I think that I am uniquely qualified to be your next trustee because I do have kids in this district. I do have, all of my own education through 2 master's degrees has been in public school. And so I would just encourage our voters not to listen to all of the distractions online. I will tell you, I have reached out to most of the people who are saying negative things about me, and invited them to talk to me because I think I want to bring a little bit of humanity back to the situation. And I think when you talk to your neighbors, you realize that you have a whole lot more in common than you don't. Not a single one of those people has taken me up on that offer. And so again, I would just encourage you to do your research. And more than that, I would encourage you to vote. I think the biggest issue that we have in our community is voter apathy. People just don't come out and vote. And so, it's not a good thing for a very small percentage of your community to be making decisions for a community of our size. And so early voting starts tomorrow. We're going to have some really fun things happening at the polls. So I would encourage you to come out, say hi, ask questions of me, ask questions of my opponent, and make your voice heard. We each are passionate about the direction that we'd like to see our district go. And so I would encourage anyone to just have those conversations and please just come out and vote. That is the most important thing, that I could say at this juncture is we've got to have our community help make these decisions.
Get out and vote, folks. Early voting starts this week. Get out there and vote. It's really important. Whitney, I really appreciate you coming on. I wish you the best. You guys put yourselves in a lot to do these things. So I'm sure glad I just get to interview you guys and not have to go through. So.
Yes, Stevie, what you do for our community is valuable. And I really hope that people take the opportunity to listen to these interviews and make an informed decision.